Aloha. Welcome to Abe Lee Seminars Sessions. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you buy leasehold property, because there are a few around. Sometimes I'll have someone from the mainland call and say, hey, I'm interested in taking a look at your condominium that's selling for $20,000. And I would then say, by the way, how did you find out about this property? He said, well, we found it on the internet. And then I'll say, do you know what the difference is between a leasehold property and fee simple property? And they'll say, what is leasehold? Then I have to explain to them that the reason the condominium is selling for $20,000 is because there's only 5 years left on the lease. So what are you going to do for 5 years? Well, you can live there, pay the $20,000, hopefully in cash. And then at the end of 5 years, you got to leave. And the fee owner is going to take the property back. That's why some leasehold properties are so cheap, because they only have a few years left. In fact, Kahala Beach condominiums near the Kahala Hotel, they only have 2 years left on the lease. And what used to sell for $500,000 years ago are now selling for $50,000 to $60,000 because there's only 2 years left. So why would someone buy something like that? Because they want to live in a nice building for a few years and enjoy Hawaii. All right? And other people might buy a property that's got maybe 15 or 20 years left on a lease and say, you know, by the time the lease is up, I'll probably be dead. And I don't have children, so I don't have to leave it to anybody. I actually sold a condominium like that in town where there's about 15 years left on the lease, and the husband and the wife were in their 65, 70 years age, and figured that by the time the lease is over, they'll be done and they can just go. Well, hopefully they're still alive. But so that does happen, where people might buy leasehold properties because it's cheaper and they don't mind renting for a while until the lease is over. Then they're going to go find something else, or they figure they might be passing on. So if they buy leasehold properties, there's a law that says you have to give the buyer a set of the leasehold documents that were started, say, 55 years ago, when the lease first started. And then the people will say, what is this 25 years fixed for the first 25? And then now you have step-ups every 10 years. That's what I was talking about in the previous tape. That there's usually a 55-year lease with 25 years fixed, and then the next 10-year increments, 3 times, there'll be reassessments of the value of the property. So by law, if you're buying leasehold property, you have to be given those leasehold documents, and you have to see how are they going to calculate the fair market value of the lease rents. So let me walk you through one of those properties that I have looked at, and I have looked at the lease. It started off, as I mentioned in the previous class, that there was $5 per square foot. It goes up to $50 or $100 a square foot, and they'll do an appraisal at the time they're going to reassess the value of the property, and the owner of the fee land would say, okay, we think the value is this much. And if the lessee, the tenant say, no, we think it's too high, then they can, in the document says, you can pick one appraiser, and if the other side doesn't agree, then they have to have 3 appraisers. And then they figure out what the fair market value is. So they will be asking appraisers to determine the fair market value to determine the lease rents. So as I mentioned to you before, if it's $5 a square foot in the very beginning and it's up to $50 a square foot, then they're going to take the $50 a square foot and calculate an 8% annual lease rent divided by the number of units in the project, and they'll figure out the pro rata share of each unit. And if a unit is 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet, the 1,000 square foot unit will pay double the lease rent than the 500 square foot unit. And that's how they work the lease properties. Now, there are some properties that are still leasehold. And I'll give you a particular building where the owner's mom and dad passed away and it was in lease. The children got it, 3 of them, and 2 of them want to sell the fee, take the money and run, invest in something else. But one sibling said, no, I want to keep it in lease. So this several hundred unit project, what they did was they divided it up. 3 of the into 3 segments, and 1 and 2 were going to be fee, and the third was going to be lease. So what they did was the luck of the draw. The first 2 people that went under the fee owners, they got the right to buy the fee. The one that ended up with the third one, which would be lease, they were stuck with the lease and they couldn't buy the fee. So luck of the draw as to who want to sell in fee and who want to sell it in lease. So that building is actually still in existence, and 2/3 of the units are in fee and 1/3 of the unit is in lease. If the fee owner says, I want to sell the whole property in lease to fee, then they have to make the proposal to the association and say, we want to sell the fee. So then 75% of the owners have to agree to buy it, and they usually do. Then they can buy the fee at the set price that is determined by appraisal. Well, what happens to the unsold 25% or less? Those people would have to continue to lease it from the fee owners, or sometimes the association will borrow the money, buy the fee, and then sell the fee interest to the owners that are in lease when and if they're ready to buy the fee. So there are different ways to switch from lease to fee, but there are mechanisms by which you have to disclose the leasehold documents, and they have to be willing to share it and let the buyer look at it, and they have 10 days, calendar days, to review the lease and say, I agree, or I don't want to continue with the purchase. So when you're dealing with leasehold properties, it's a little bit different, and you do have more disclosures that must be made. Now, there's one project in Salt Lake, and they have a lease for, I think, 75 years originally, and I think there's about 45 years left now, and they don't have a step up. They have a set fee price for the rest of the life of that lease, which is amazing. Why they did it that way, I don't know. So I don't know the history of who the original fee owners were, but that lease is fixed for the whole period, and there's no step-ups, and there's no appraisal of the value of the land. So this is a very interesting part of Hawaii real estate that the mainland people would never know, because they don't have leasehold properties on the mainland for condominiums or single-family homes, but Hawaii had tons of them. Hope this helps you to understand what happens if someone does buy the leasehold interest in a condominium or a house and not the fee. Aloha.